Well, welcome to our webinar, Radio at Home, How New Technologies Are Changing Listener Behavior. I'm Fred Jacobs. I'm along with Steve Goldstein. We're really glad you could be here. This is a very hot topic in radio circles, and we're really excited to be hosting this webinar today. It's going to be in two parts. I'm going to handle a lot of the research end, setting the tone for how we got here on the home front and how it's changing. And then Steve's going to actually get into more of the strategic focus specific to smart speakers. We're not going to sell you either. We're actually just talking about the space and how it works. In case you don't know who we are or you haven't encountered us in one way, shape, or form, let me do the introductions. That's me on the left, Fred Jacobs. I am a 40-year veteran of radio and programming, which means I'm old and have been doing this for a long time. My original company is Jacobs Media. I also run Jake Apps, a mobile app development company. We're very involved in a lot of different things, including commercial and public radio, connected cars, and audience research. And you're going to see some of the research that we've done. Steve, want to say hello and introduce yourself?
I am much younger. I'm 35 years in the business. Well, I guess the AARP stuff is still coming to me anyway. About 2 years ago, I started my own thing after a 30-year career at Saga Communications, where I was the executive VP. Started my own thing because I really saw this shift to on-demand audio. Did not see this whole smart speaker thing coming, but that just adds onto it. I work with broadcasters, I work with podcasters, I work with startups on developing their on-demand audio strategies, and thrilled to be here today and thrilled to be working with the Jacobs Media folks on Sonic AI, a company that we started just a couple of months ago to address the needs of the smart speaker sector.
So let's talk about how we got here. For the last many years, our company in particular has been in the forefront of what's going on with the car dashboard. Some of you know we're from the Detroit area, so cars are very much in our DNA. And automotive is a very, very important piece of what is going on in radio. The lion's share of radio listening takes place while people are on four wheels. So we've been very involved with all things automotive. But meanwhile, while we've been in the driveway and the garage, there's a lot going on inside people's homes. And radio listening and media consumption is changing there quite a bit. We've been tracking a lot of this in our tech surveys. We do an annual tech survey. It's web-based. It aggregates email databases from hundreds of radio stations around the country. And so we've been asking a lot about listening location, specifically listening in the home. And to a great degree, radios are beginning to disappear from the home front. If you look all the way at the top, you can see from last year, Tech Survey 12, to this year's total, it's only down 1%, right? 89 to 88% having a radio where they live. But I would suggest to you that if we would have asked this question, what, a decade ago, percentage of radios in home would have probably been in the high 90s, right? Probably bordering on 100%. And as you look at some of the subgroups there, especially millennials, where only 3/4 of them have a working radio at home, that really is an important finding and something that we are continuing to track, because there is obviously a trend, right? It's hard to even go out and even buy a working radio at this point in time. So what are people actually doing in their homes? Well, a lot of them are buying Sonos systems and similar wireless speaker systems. Overall, about a fifth fall into this range. And you can see there is a definite pattern there generationally. The younger the listener, the younger the person, the younger the consumer, the greater likelihood that they are, in fact, wiring their homes with these incredible speaker systems. The other big change on the home front is with televisions, right? For many years, TVs really didn't change a whole lot, but in the past several years, smart TVs, internet-connected televisions have become the thing. You can see way up on top there, our 3-year trend. Now a majority of our respondents own an internet-connected television. Men more than women. Millennials and Xers also leading the way. But once you own a smart TV, that really changes the way that you watch television. And in fact, it has led to an on-demand explosion. We asked our respondents what percentage of their overall television viewing actually takes place on demand. And you can see that about a fifth said half of it. A quarter said most of it, and 7% said all of it. Very few people now listening or watching television in real time once you get beyond special programs like the Grammys or the Academy Awards or, of course, sports. So a lot of on demand is happening in the television space. And with it, voice commands are beginning to kick in as well. If you are a Comcast subscriber, it's very likely that you have one of those X1 remotes that you see there pulsing at you on the right side of that chart. The reality is people are very comfortable with voice commands on a variety of different devices that they use. Question, as you can see down there at the bottom, how often do you use the built-in voice command feature on devices that you own? And a quarter say occasionally, a fifth say frequently. So voice commands lead us into our next big finding, and that is smart speakers. And in our last tech survey conducted January and February of this year, just over 1 in 10 respondents owns an Amazon Echo or Google Home device. Now, we know Apple is coming with their own device in December. None of us really knows exactly what that's going to mean and how that's going to impact the space. But right now, Echo and Google Home alone contributing 11% share, which is very powerful. I think the most remarkable thing about this chart is how unremarkable it is. When you look down all the different demographic groups, there's hardly any difference from age groups to gender groups, to ethnic groups. It's all in that same very narrow range. And that's unusual for a new technology. New technologies typically start out with young adoption, and then eventually Xers and boomers figure it out. That's not what appears to be happening in the smart speaker space. People of all generations, genders, and ethnicities are jumping on. And I'm showing you the format slide here that basically shows the exact same thing. We've got all these different formats here, starting with rhythmic CHR at the top, then sports, hot AC, and then on the bottom, variety hits, rock, country, and classic rock. And again, a very narrow range there, 10 to 15%. And that tells us that adoption of smart speakers really happening very quickly. This is an important finding here. Amazon has essentially a 70 share at this point in time. They really have done a great job getting out in front of everybody. Interestingly, as we just discussed, Apple is late. Google is struggling here. And Amazon continues to innovate, just coming out now with a version of their Echo that actually has a video screen. We've talked to the Amazon folks. Steve will share some of that with you later on in this webinar, but I can tell you just how they sound. They are dedicated to making sure that they keep a big distance between themselves and everybody else. And that probably amplified a little bit yesterday, which was Prime Day for Amazon. And the numbers just came out this morning. They sold 3 times as many Echoes and Dots yesterday as they did on the last Prime Day. So they are moving very quickly. They are quite affordable, much less expensive than an iPhone, for example. And the Echoes and Dots are quite a bit less expensive than what the Apple device is projected to sell for. So what do people actually use smart speakers for? Here's some really solid data here that kind of gives you an idea. A lot of people are just asking general questions, you know, in the same way that you would do an internet search. A lot of people want to know what the weather's going to be like before they leave work, but there's an awful lot of streaming music going on out there, as you can see. And then a few rungs down, people are also getting news updates and headlines as well. And we actually think that that stream music percentage there of 54% is going to go up in successive years as radio, frankly, gets more involved in the space, is promoting that they actually have skills and interesting features on these devices. We're really expecting streaming to actually amp up. And one of the reasons is that skills are being developed at a breakneck pace. You can see it started out pretty modestly just a couple of 2-3 years ago, but already just Q2 2017, 15,000 skills are there. Very reminiscent for those of us who came up working for Jake Apps, our mobile app development company that started in 2009 when the App Store opened. It was a very, very similar progression there. And Steve will talk a little bit about the quality of skills that are available. They kind of run the gamut, but the bottom line is everybody is racing around to develop really interesting skills. Steve?
That means I unmute.
Yes, you must unmute your mic.
All right. So this guy was kind of genius, but he was kind of wrong. Here we are 95 years later, and radio is doing pretty well by any metric you want to look at. Radio has held on better than a lot of other media. However, I think some of the data that Fred just showed you portends some significant changes, not just in the home, but with the ways that people consume and the devices that they use to consume audio. And so I wanted to focus on three big things here. Not just the smart speakers, but also podcast and smartphones, because it's all part of the same ecosystem of people getting their audio from different devices in different places. So let's start with podcasting. And this is not a niche anymore. This is 67 million people, 1 out of 5 Americans, are listening to podcasts every month, about 42 million every week. And Apple just released some data recently that said that there were 10 billion downloads of podcasts worldwide in 2016. And there's an awful lot of them. There's 400,000 podcasts out there. So there's a sea of content. But I think the key point for commercial radio especially is it's an on-demand world. Maybe a slower adoption than what happened on the TV side, or is happening on the TV side, but the arc is clear. And so the top podcasts, this is actually a chart from yesterday, the top podcasts tend to be dominated by public radio-like content. NPR is 7 of the top 20. But just to give you an idea, This American Life, always one of the top podcasts, does about 2 million listeners on the air, and it does about 2.2 million downloads of the podcast. Pod Save America, which is a left-leaning political podcast, which came on right as the whole Trump administration came in. They had, in their first couple of weeks, 1 million downloads, and the energy has continued there. So a lot of action and a lot of activity in this sector, and it's also pretty young. Podcasting has started with a really enviable median age of 31. Just to contrast that, commercial radio, a median age is 45. Prime time on network television is 58. Cable news, by the way, 69, just to give you an idea. So where are people consuming podcasts, and why should we be concerned about it? Well, take a look at the top of this chart. People are hanging out at home. No matter what research you look at, you see the same thing, that podcasting is happening in the home. And so that's really important for this conversation about devices, places, and things of that nature. And by the way, the podcasting thing hasn't even maximized itself yet, because it's not a lot of in-car listening. But as Fred talked about with Apple CarPlay and so forth, you can see the arc to more mobile, or meaning car, in the near future. So we can move ahead here. Commercial radio is starting to get into this. I just threw up a couple of slides here of podcasts that are starting to happen on the radio side. It's embryonic. only about 1% of all podcast audio is coming from commercial radio. Tisk, tisk, I have my finger up here because the greatest audio producers in history should be dominating no matter whether it comes out of a transmitter or not. And so let me give you one example. Let's move ahead here. I think there are three kinds of audio content, but one of them is original, one of them is clips, but the basic one that I think you should be thinking about as you get started in podcasting is the retention strategy of time shifting. So let's do the morning math. The average really good morning show is pulling down about 3/4 hours per morning, which means that about 80% of the content is missed on the average morning show. And again, let me rephrase that. That's not the average morning show. That's a top performing morning show, and 80% of the content is missed. So, podcasting, and as we get into the smart speaker conversation, it's all going to be about developing retention strategies and the ability to do something we've never been able to do before, which is after that content is aired and it's headed off to the dwarf planet Pluto, what can we do with it? And now we actually have devices and ways to do that. So let's segue over to smartphones. That's where most podcasts are heard, and you don't need a whole lot of stats here. I mean, you know how pervasive smartphones are, but here's a good example in the next slide. This is a beggar in China, and he has a QR code on that cup. That's how pervasive mobile is all around the world, and of course in the US. But here's maybe one of the most important statistics I can pass along to you today. Already, 1 out of 5 audio minutes, 20% of all audio minutes, are coming from the smartphone. And that may sound counterintuitive, but think about it. You've got own music, you've got streaming audio, you have podcasts. There are so many audio sources that this thing has become the entertainment hub, especially with the younger audience. And I did focus groups recently, and one of the big complaints that people had was that their hard drives on their smartphones were filling up because they were loading in videos, audio. So this has become the portable entertainment hub. And this next slide is one of my science projects. I have 3 science projects. This is my 18, soon to be 19-year-old science project, Ben. And his expectation is that all audio is on demand. Never thinks about live radio, maybe listens to it a little bit in the car, but his expectation for audio, video, is that it is available on his device at a time of his choosing. And if any of you have kids, you know precisely what I'm talking about. And if you are millennial, you know precisely what I'm talking about. So I think this really begs the question, what's your mobile strategy? And now we shift into smart speakers. Okay, so newest and hottest, so much traction here. This is why Fred and I put together Sonic AI, but this is a real opportunity. Sometimes technology disrupts, certainly the case with newspapers and other media, but in this case, technology has just handed radio a retention strategy on a silver platter. 27 million of these things expected to be out there by the end of 2017. And Fred mentioned earlier that there are 15,000 skills. So if Apple called them apps, Amazon calls them skills. Let's move on to the next slide here. And it is a tsunami of skills that are being developed, and some of them are really smart and worth trying, and others are idiotic and crazy and will never be used. But that's the phase that we're in. There's a lot of trial. Fred has said to me several times, when the smartphones started coming out, there were crazy apps on all different sort of subjects, from fart apps on forward. Well, you're seeing some of that here. You're seeing a lot of companies trying stuff, and we'll see whether it works out. But as you saw in the earlier chart, audio is the natural skill for these devices, and why Now it opens up to a strategy. So let's go through some of those strategic concepts right now. First and foremost is that this for radio is a time shifted opportunity. This is that content that used to go away. You never thought about what to do with it afterwards. It needs to be valuable. It can't be just anything. But if it's a major morning bid or something of that nature, and it can have life, not only can it have life on these devices, but if you're in a PPM market and if it is listened to within 24 hours, you can get credit. By the way, television has done magnificently with this. TV has what they call C3 and C7. So Grey's Anatomy, for example, gets a 60% increase in the ratings from the time it aired on Thursday evening to 7 days later. People watching the show at a time that's more convenient. Nielsen's not there yet for PPM, only at 24 hours, but hopefully they'll move in that direction. But we'll take the 24 hours. It's a great opportunity, especially if that bit aired at 6:40 in the morning. People didn't hear it. It was quality content. Now you have a way to distribute it and make it easy for people to get to later, especially if you cross promote that. So as we've been sort of giving you the theme throughout, if radio is not in the home, then this thing can be a radio. That's the upside. The downside is you've got Pandora, Spotify, Amazon is pushing its own music service. There's a lot of competition out there. And so that will be a critical piece going forward, is how you're going to fit into that mix. Another thing that we have learned early on is about the importance of getting the name right. Think about this like the URL grab that occurred in the beginning of the internet, where you wanted to have the right name for your radio station or whatever your business was. Up until last week, if you said Z100, play Z100 on the device, it played a country station in Indiana. So getting the right name is critical, and that's one of the things that any of the developers developing skills will tell you. And so I mentioned the whole Pandora, Spotify thing. TuneIn has 100,000 radio stations on the platform and 4 million on-demand products. iHeart, thousands of radio stations. So it's really our belief that while it's important that you be on the device, and you actually are on the device if your station is on iHeart or TuneIn, that there's going to have to be fresh and relevant and unique content to get them to come in and use your radio station on the device. I don't think being there is an entitlement to doing well there. And a good example would be, there are a lot of cable channels. I mean, the average cable service has 189 channels. The average individual watches 17. Boomerang TV is in 43 million homes. Anybody watching that? Fusion is in 40 million homes. Anybody watching that? So being on the cable system does not mean that you were going to get the big ratings that an A&E or TBS or CNN might get. So I think thinking beyond the stream is going to be really significant. And that brings us to the overall notion with smartphones and podcasts and now smart speakers, that there's an evolution occurring here. And Fred, why don't you jump back in as we sort of pull this thing together here? Because I think one of the things that we've learned is that each medium is different. Television, for example, put up the 6 p.m. news on the internet and nobody watched it. Nobody needed to see that correspondent standing out in front of the police tape at 6 p.m. later in the evening at 8 p.m. But when they started chunking up the content and making it into a newsroom repurposed for apps, short stories, short videos, slideshows, they developed a whole new business. So it was a rethinking of their newsroom. Same newsroom, but different output of content. So we're not dead yet, but we are in need of evolution for sure. So we have a bunch of action steps for you. Fred, you want
Homework.
to start us out here?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the key thing here, this sounds so elementary, but it is so critical in immersing yourself in the smart speaker space is go out and buy an Echo or a Dot. Again, we showed you the Amazon 70 share earlier. Doesn't mean that a Google Home is a bad purchase. I know a number of people who have gone out and purchased both. But for sure, buy an Amazon product. Because there's no way that you can really conceptualize and think about what your audience might be doing on these devices unless you have one. And that was certainly true. I can tell you, I've got the scars to show it in the smartphone space. It was very hard to develop apps at the beginning for clients who did not own a smartphone. Our conversations about the connected car really kind of wander away when we're talking with people who don't drive one. So this is an easy one. It's tax deductible if you're in the business, right? Buy an Amazon Echo or a Dot.
And it was $34 yesterday for the Dot. So yes, this is not the Apple product, which is like a $400 item. Also, really important, we get asked the question a lot, why isn't Google Home as much a focus? And the answer is there are 398 different skills built for Google Home, while there's 15,000 for Amazon. They're on different arcs. They're really both different devices. They do a lot of similar things, but custom audio is much more difficult in the Google environment today.
And then, as Steve said earlier, this whole invocation craziness, and that goes back to how people are actually going to call you up on the Echo device. This is complicated. It is very much akin to the domain name weirdness that went on a couple of decades ago, but we can tell you more about it if we chat offline. But as Steve said, many of your stations are accessible through TuneIn, especially if your radio station is referred to with your call letters. But if you are a KISS or an Eagle or a Z, yeah, all of those, the device doesn't really know what to do. And so one of the areas that we have really had to drill hard on with our initial clients here at Sonic AI is talking about the ways in which people refer to your station, to your brand, and then coming up with an invocation that reflects that. And then the part after that, of course, is educating your audience about how to access you on the device. But I think we both want to emphasize just what an important part of the smart speaker strategy this really is.
And this is also important. So I mentioned earlier that a stream is not enough. What can you do on this device? I mean, you can do podcasts, you can do news briefs. We are talking to a lot of our clients about original Alexa-only content. There are many things that can be featured from a radio station. In some radio stations, it'll be easy. Others are, say, a music pump. I think it'll be more difficult for you to come up with distinguishable content. But for those that have difficult to duplicate content, benchmarks and things like that are perfect for this device. And you should be thinking about short form. Don't be thinking about 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour. Think more bite size.
So that's really the move here, is to actually do a brand inventory exercise and start thinking about the content that really would make sense for Echo at this point. I can tell you one of our experiences with mobile app development, there were a lot of initial apps that were kind of kitchen sink apps, right? They crammed everything that they could think of into the app, and that made for a tough experience for the user. And so thinking about what pieces of your content make sense for Echo, as Steve mentioned, perhaps you actually want to create exclusive content for the Echo, but this is the exercise that really involves the strategy this is really where Steve and I come in. We think it's really important in the development of these skills that you have a couple of programming strategists working with you at the table to actually talk about making sure that your skills are congruent with your brand and that make sense for the listener. So to a great degree, yes, this is a technical job, but it's also a programming exercise.
And we do believe in simplicity, especially in something that needs to be memorable. When people come to the device, they're not working off of a script. Hopefully they're working off of memory from something that you told them on air. But think about and try some of the apps, skills rather, from The Tonight Show. They've done a brilliant one. Oprah, so simple and so smart, where she provides one 60-second message per day. Not complicated, easy to get to. We love that sort of mission.
And as Steve has emphasized a couple of times in this presentation, one of the big takeaways here, and really for all of these platforms, whether it's smartphones, podcasts, or Alexa, is that every one of these requires its own strategy. You just can't repurpose something that you're doing on the air and throw it into your smart speaker program or your podcasts, or vice versa. So thinking about the smart speaker vertical in its own place, not just repurposing content from other places, we think that really is a great beginning.
And if you look at other media, they have iterated. Newspapers used to be just a dump of all their articles. Now they do original content, slideshows, and so forth on their websites. I mentioned TV stations earlier. This is all reimagining stuff, and audio needs to go through the same thing. I don't think the average radio station is going to have great success just putting the stream out there. They're going to need to entice people with a better experience. I saw SiriusXM just came onto the device, and if you're a subscriber, you can get all their commercial-free channels. And so there is just another competitive element. You're going to have to come up with things that are unique. Ira Blumberg, who runs Gimlet, called it the second golden age of audio. That's Alex Blumberg, sorry. And I would tend to agree. I think this is an extremely exciting time, especially with these new devices that we've been handed. If we master them well, there are many new things that we can do and many new ways we can talk to people in the future beyond just the transmitter.
Hey, so here we are. We brought our companies together here on this project because we really believe in this space. We think it's going to grow. I mean, as much as it pains me to say this, I'm looking forward to Tech Survey 14 early next year, because I want to see just how much growth there is in the smart speaker space. And I think a day like yesterday, Prime Day, is a pretty good example of just how quickly it's moving. I think the really good news is that in our conversations, certainly at the NAB in Las Vegas this past April, and its State Broadcaster Association conferences that we've attended in the past couple of months, this is on a lot of radar screens, and we think it's important. The home front is critically important to radio. There is a lot happening there, and the really cool thing is that radio can participate in this space. It reminds me so much of the smartphone revolution. I mean, we were so blessed as an industry that we can have our app icons on the desktop of an iPhone or an iPad. And the same thing really is in play here with these smart speakers. We can participate in this if we are smart enough and strategic enough to take advantage of it.
And so that slide showed blogs. We have way too many blogs. There's Fred's blog, there's my blog, and just to make it even worse, we put up our own Sonic AI blog, which has a lot of data, and we're updating that. And it's you know, so it's pretty focused on smart speakers only, but a place that you could check into periodically.
All right, so there's the URL for the website, and you can access the blog there. So hey, we're wrapping up. Hey, the transmitter and tower is what put food on all of our tables, and it will for decades to come. But obviously, there are other platforms and other horizons that we can go after here, and there's some tremendous opportunities for radio. As Steve said, I mean, this really is another golden age here, and we are in position as an industry with our brands to be able to take advantage of it. So there's our contact information there, email addresses. Steve and I are both on Twitter way too much. So you can play with us there a little bit as well. But yeah, we'd love to chat with you and have a conversation about your station, your strategy, your brand, and how you can be a part of the whole smart speaker thing.
Hope this is helpful, and whether you do any work with us or not, you should be on this device and learn how to master it and all these other devices, because it's where things are moving.
Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you being here this afternoon. Have a great week, and hopefully we'll talk soon.